Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Welcome to part 2 of the 2020 Project Orchids, introducing the set of plants that are going to carry on for a year's worth with 3 monthly intervals. That's the plan. And as in part 1, they won't all be my best plants. I've deliberately chosen some struggling plants, some okay, and some that are doing particularly well, but they've all got a reason behind them, which is something to follow, if you see what I mean. A plant just growing and doing its thing normally doesn't really, generate a lot of thoughts or anything. So anyway, this is the Dendrobium set, yeah, let's get going. Okay, the first one is Dendrobium rhodostictum. And out of my Latouria types, I can still relatively safely say it's my favourite. All of my Latouria types have had a hard time. Heat wave, lack of humidity during heat wave knocked a lot of their leaves off. Some literally went down to 0 leaves and have had to start again, or are in the process of starting again. This one dropped some of its leaves but managed to hold on to some. The latest progress on this is a miserable disaster because it was growing a nice new growth and it's aborted it. So what we've got now is a plant that's effectively doing nothing, but it's not dying, but it's also not growing. It has got a root system, yeah, so I mean in amongst that moss and up the back are some roots. They are viable roots. What it hasn't got is a single sign of a new growth at this point in time. I'm hoping that the warmer weather and the longer days will bring this one back into growth. It has a few leaves to support itself, and that's about all I can say about it at the moment. The bulbs are not totally desiccated, although they are a little bit. They should be quite plump and shiny, these top parts, yeah, on a thin cane. That's its natural look, and a nice deep green set of leaves. So I'm going to try and bring this one back to life, basically. We'll see how we do. The next one is Dendrobium Lindley Eye, or aggregatum some people still call it. It was called that for a very long time, so it's understandable if people stick to the older name. I think it's accepted as a synonym, so it's still okay to use the old name. Sometimes when things are renamed or reclassified, the old one is not allowed effectively, so I think it's a synonym in this case. Anyway, this one's been chosen because it's a relatively new plant. I got it at the beginning of last year, or sometime near the start of the growing season last year. So it's had one growing season with me in which it put up this cane and this cane. That's all it basically did last year, but well, I say all it did. What it also did was pushed out quite a lot of roots right down underneath the mount, yeah, and all in through the moss. Now this particular plant has been grown on from a seedling, yeah. So it's an unbloomed plant. It's not a division off of one that has bloomed, it's an unbloomed plant. And sometimes they can be a little more difficult to get to bloom for the first time. But you can see the progress of from the tiny little seedling pseudobulbs to gradually getting larger and larger until the latest set on the right hand side are the full size bulbs. So there's no sign of any spikes on this, so we may have a whole year of looking at a plant doing nothing more than growing new canes and new roots, because if it doesn't bloom very, very soon, then it's not going to, if you see what I mean, because this is its time. If it misses this chance, then it'll have to wait till this time next year, basically. So we might not see blooms on this during its progress, but as I said, it's a relatively new plant, and I've included it to see just how much growth I can get on what is a progressing seedling coming up to maturity. We'll see what we can do with it. I'm hoping it will grow right off the mount this year. But what I would really like to see would be some new growth up this end of the plant. When I first got it, if you look down there, there was a new growth heading in this direction, and it aborted and carried on growing these at this end. So at the moment it's only got one real direction of growth, but it's capable of starting new growths now anywhere, all round there, possibly along the top, but what I'd like is something to start over here. We'll see what we can do and follow its progress through the growing season. I have to stand well back to get this one in. It's quite a tall plant, this one. It's actually got a proper name. It's a nobile type hybrid, but it does actually have a name, and it's Sweet Pinky Momoko. Well, for its sins. Now I've chosen this one as it's potentially a standard nobile type that should normally bloom in late winter, early spring. But because when I bought it, it was in bloom in the middle of the growing season last year, it's what I call an out of season nobile. And the idea is to try and bring it back into season, which I'm hoping to do during a single growing season. It's not always possible. But when I got it, it was in bloom. So these two canes round the back here with all the bloom stumps, as I call them, those were in bloom when I got it. They didn't last too long because they'd been open quite a while. I was warned, so it's not like I got cheated or anything. I was told that there was a new growth that was damaged and that the blooms had been open some time and probably wouldn't last that long. So I bought it knowing that. But what I did manage to do is push on the other two new growths, which are these two. So this one out here, complete with some mealybugs. I'll have to deal with those, I suppose. I think they're already dead, actually. And then this cane here, that have both grown up to full size. They haven't swollen to the full size of the previous ones, but don't forget those would have been grown in a forced grown in perfect environment. So they're as good as, you know, that nursery could produce. So these aren't a bad second place, quite honestly. There is no sign of any buds on those two canes. This is what I mean by being out of season. Because it was forced into bloom in the middle of the year, yeah, these canes, although they've grown to full size, they were still growing as we went into winter. And they haven't long stopped growing and got their terminal leaf, so they haven't had a proper winter. So these two might not bloom at all. What they might do is just bloom late. But what I'm looking for on this is new growths as soon as possible, so that the next set of canes have got a full growing season to get to their proper size and then can have a full winter. So we'll see what happens with this one. But the only way this is going to get back in season is with new growths. You can't really do it with ones that are already there. So these may or may not bloom. If they do, they are going to be out of season yet again. It will get back into season if I can get some new growths going soon, push them on through this growing season to their full size as we go into winter, and then give them their appropriate winter treatment to get them into bloom late winter, early spring. That way it will then repeat that cycle over and over again. So that's the idea with this one. It's out of season now. Let's see if we can kick it back in one season. It usually takes two. We'll see what we can do. We've practically got to go out in the yard to get this one in shot. This is Dendrobium Crowseein, and I've now had this, what I would consider a fair amount of time for a non-bloomer of such size. That's why this one's been chosen. So far I've not managed to get this to bloom. And it's a dendrobium. Now, I'm normally okay with those, rumour has it. Anyway, it's a monster, and subsequent filmings will probably not be done like this, squashed on the bench. I just wanted to, you know, get the full shot this time round. Now this plant's in 3 sets of canes. These are the oldest ones. These were here when I got it. They haven't bloomed. Most of them were leafless, and quite honestly at the time they looked dead. I was worried that this plant wasn't even going to live. And these canes were about over a metre long, so it took up an awful lot of space. I mounted it and it started to push out some new growth. That's these canes down here. But they didn't grow well at all through that growing season because the plant had no roots. It couldn't really support itself any sense. But towards the end of that season, it started to produce some roots. Unfortunately, that meant that these canes were dwarfed. They never reached their full size by a long shot. It is still possible that despite they're undersized, we could get some blooms on these, because these are the older canes now. These are the oldest. This little set here are the next oldest. This huge cluster up here are last year's canes. Yeah? Now, I don't know whether it blooms on the previous year's growth or the 2-year-old growths. Some dendrobiums are that way inclined. So they spend a season growing the canes, but they don't bloom the next season, they bloom the following one. And some bloom the next season. I don't know what this is going to do, but I would seriously like to see some blooms this year. I don't know whether that's going to happen. It's had a winter rest of sorts. It's a drier in winter type. So obviously it's had feed withheld to a degree, but not totally, because some of these growths up here did decide to carry on growing through the winter. Most of them have now finished growing and got their terminal leaves. So there's little or no growth going on at the moment. There's also no sign of any brand new growths at the base yet. So we'll see what this one's going to do. What I'd like to see is a small smattering of blooms down here. That will tell me it blooms on the 2-year-old canes, or quite a lot of blooms in this area, which means it blooms on the 1-year-old canes. And I can disregard the rest of the plant from now on because it's the new growths that I need to work on. So that's the idea, and we should be getting some new growths from the base in the not too distant future. We're starting to get the temperatures back now, and we've also got natural daylight for the appropriate amount of hours without having the artificial lighting anymore. So a monster, I had to include one monster, and this are it, an unbloomed very large dendrobium. Bit of a contradiction really. Still, I'm working on it. Right, we're going from one of the biggest to one of the smallest. This is my not very good polite version, Dendrobium Victoria Regina. A plant I would like a good specimen sized version of. If I wait for this one to be that, I'll be waiting 4 or 5 years. But this is all I've got to work with at the moment until I find such a plant that I can just buy. This one arrived in a poor state, virtually rootless. The cane that's hanging down there was already on it. The cane on the end of my thumb sticking out to the left was shriveled and totally desiccated and effectively dead and of no use, so it got cut off. And all it's done so far is push up this tiny little weak growth and start to grow some roots. And that's as far as it's got so far. That's a whole growing season, that is. Strictly speaking, that cane is still growing. There is a new leaf just forming at the apex, so it's still growing. Now it may put on a spurt because of the time of year and the better light. It may put on a spurt and carry on growing throughout this season. It may open that leaf and stop growing altogether. But what I need from this is new canes from the base and a better root system. Otherwise, it's just not going anywhere. Otherwise, it's not going to bloom. It's not, and if it tried, I would stop it. It's not strong enough. So this has been hard work to get this going, and it's still going to be hard work because it's not got going to any great extent yet. What I'm going to get out of this year, I really haven't got a clue. It's as simple as that. The cane I've got with green leaves may grow, it may double its size, it may stop where it is. But what I do need are new growths from the base. Hopefully that get to that more like that size. If they could get to that size, I'd be happier. Bigger would be better. But that's what I'm aiming at. And as I said, it's not doing well at all. Strictly speaking, it's never going to do brilliantly in here because it's a cool grower. So it's not going to like my summer. Yeah? And it's a drier in winter when it would virtually stop growing. So, you know, it's not got the best growing season because it's too warm for it. But with good humidity, keeping it hydrated and fed if it decides to grow, there's no point in chucking loads of fertiliser on that. It's not doing anything. But if it does start, then we can push it and see how far I can get with it. So that's why that one's been chosen. Non-bloomer, and I wouldn't expect it to on a plant that size. And one that's already had one season and done very little with it. So let's see if we can get it to do a bit more this year. We've got a new root at the top that's sticking out and gone aerial, but just below it is the tip of another one. Now that's new. And then we've got this little one down the bottom that's growing out of the old desiccated cane that got cut off. So it is growing a root now and again. And that's about as much as it's doing at the moment. We'll see what we can do with that as the year progresses. Right, and this is the last one. When I did the video showing the plants that I'd selected, this is not the one I selected. I've changed my mind. Well, it's my video, I can do what I like. Basically, I wanted to include a Dendrobium phalaenopsis type because for me they don't do very well. And I want to see if I can stop that happening. And the one that I chose was in quite a bad way. It still is, and it's not even one I really want to keep. So putting effort and everything into that one just seemed a bit silly, whereas this one I do want to keep. This is Thai Angel, and this was split a while ago, so I've actually got two of these. One of them was on the list of plants to go, but nobody decided they wanted that, so I'll probably end up keeping both. They may eventually go back in a pot together and become a joined up plant, because obviously the more canes you've got on a plant, the more chance you've got of blooms coming. But this was the stronger, better looking piece, even though it only had two canes on it. Both the canes have bloomed. This one's had a single cane out of the top. This, let's turn it round, this cane over here has actually bloomed 3 times. It's actually pushed one out of the apex, which is normal for a phalaenopsis type, is to do that first. And then sometimes they will produce extra spikes lower down. Not always. They need to be strong and vigorous. So now if this cane had been strong and vigorous, it may well have produced others, and it may still bloom again. But what I've got at the moment is a single new growth and no new roots. And the root system on this is poor. I'm not going to try and lift it out, because if I lift it up by the stake and the plant, the chances are it will pull itself out of the pot. Let's see if it will lift. You can see the plant lifting out of the pot. It's got so few roots it can't even hold itself in the pot. So the new growth should produce a new root system, which should get the plant going a bit better. At the moment it's surviving on its resources, because it's certainly not getting much in through the bottom end. Now these canes are not desiccated, they're fine, and it's got green leaves to support itself. There are a few marks on some of the leaves. But it's surviving on the minimal rations at the moment, because that's all it can get, because it's lack of root system. So let's see if we can get it a root system and see how well that latest new growth actually does. I'm hoping that can get up to full size, and it would be nice if it was joined by 1 or 2 others, but that may not happen. It may just be a single new growth this year. We shall wait and see. But the most important thing for this plant to do is to get some roots, which it hasn't got at the moment, even though it's supporting itself quite well so far. It won't survive like that forever. Yeah, it will start to go downhill if it stays rootless for too much longer. So we're starting to get the longer days and the higher temperatures. That's going to put a demand on the plant that without roots it's not going to be able to support itself much longer. So we'll see what we can do with that one. But yeah, so a change of plant from the original list, but it's still a phalaenopsis type dendrobium. It just happens to be one that I want to keep long term rather than one that probably won't be with me much longer. Yeah. There we go then. So there we go then. That's part 2. That's the selection for the dendrobiums. Some large, some medium, some small. A couple that are growing well but may have an associated problem, like the giant chryseum. Massive plant but no blooms yet. And some that are really struggling to even exist in this world, or in my world. So a bit of an assortment, and we'll see what we can do with those as the year progresses. Part 2's update, first update, will be in 3 months' time, and we'll see how they've progressed in that amount of time. Bearing in mind it's the main start of the growing season now, so they're coming into what should be a progress point. So we'll see what we can do. Thanks for dropping by, and see you next time.